It has indeed been a turbulent start of COP29 with the diplomatic fallout between the host country and France, and also with Argentina pulling back its delegation. But none of this really affects the challenge we have and the fact that we are threatening to transgress even more of the planetary boundaries. And this is what we're going to talk about in this session. Exponential transition plans for net zero business is brought to you by this Exponential Roadmap initiative in this session. And these plans, they imagine a world which we have not broken any more planetary boundaries, and in a world where humans and also businesses still can thrive. So we'll talk about how transition plans can guide us and guide companies in their transformation towards a business that is compatible with this net zero operating space that we need to focus on. But before we move on into a panel discussion, let's look at how dangerously close we are to transgressing more planetary boundaries. This is a reminder that science shows that there are 9 systems and processes that are called the planetary boundaries. And they, of course, contribute to the state of balance that the planet needs to be in to support its functions. So let's now turn to Anders Levermann. He's professor for climate dynamics at the Potsdam Institute for Impact Research. So wonderful to have you join us.
Yes, hello.
How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Excellent. So Anders, please tell us, what is the state of our planet's health?
Well, we have, as you mentioned, 9 planetary boundaries that we have identified and that we are transgressing at a rapid speed. 6 of these have been transgressed already, and one of them is the climate system. Now, the climate system is complex, and we are very often focusing on the tipping points of the climate system, which are large-scale regions and processes that if we bring them to a tipping point, they will change their quality dramatically. For example, the Greenland ice sheet, the Antarctic ice sheet, and especially the Western Arctic ice sheet, but also parts of the Eastern Arctic ice sheets, the Amazon rainforest, and so on and so forth. We will be seeing a complete melt of the Arctic ice in summer in about 20 years. Coral reefs are dying everywhere on the planet, but the big important thing, especially for businesses, are the weather extremes. We see from the statistics as weather extremes increase exponentially. We understand this statistically, but also physically. If you consider the bell curve of, for example, the heat in a specific region or country, then you can imagine that if you increase the temperature by only a little bit, the bell curve shifts, and the extremes at the end of the heat side of this curve increase quadratic exponentially. We've seen this in Europe. We've seen this everywhere on the planet. So we understand the mechanism behind this exponential growth. With respect to floods, we've just seen tremendous floods in Spain, but over the last summer there have been floods in Brazil and all around the planet, really. This is also deeply footed in physics, because we know the Clausius-Clapeyron equation of 1834, which tells us that a warm atmosphere can hold more water vapor. And this is exactly how extreme rainfall events increase exponentially. 7% more intense for every degree of warming, 17% more frequent for every degree of warming, which means that we have just seen about 1.5 degrees of global warming worldwide, which means that on land this has been basically double, which means that 17% per degree of warming translates into 60% higher frequency of extreme rainfall events. And this is what we see everywhere on the planet. The jet stream is meandering more and more and is causing more dynamic extreme events all around the planet. And this kind of fireworks will bring our societies, our economies to the verge of collapse. And this is not a physical tipping point, but a societal one, the one that we have to worry about most.
Thank you very much, Anders. So in terms of cost, you mentioned this, in terms of cost, if we look at the business perspective, if we stay on this trajectory, what will this cost by the turn of the century?
Um, because of the inertia in the climate system, uh, we have um, we have basically locked in the temperature evolution of the next 20 years. This is depressing, but it doesn't mean that we can't do anything. We're not allowed to do, we're not allowed to stop doing something, obviously, because whatever happens after the 20 years is in our hands right now. And since carbon dioxide that is coming from fossil fuels, from oil, gas, and coal, is staying in the atmosphere for basically for forever, that means we can only stabilize the temperature of the planet if we go to zero carbon emissions. Now, if we don't do that, we'll increase the pressure on the economy. It's not the only impact of climate change. Obviously, we have enormous impacts on nature and society and human well-being beyond the economic costs. But recent studies, starting from Stanford University studies in 2015, but then we have added a few in Nature in the last 2 years, have shown that in the past, weather changes, that is temperature variability, but also just annually higher temperatures, the annually higher rainfall, more rainy days, more extreme rainfall events, but also deviations of the rainfall from what we are used to in a season. All of these have impacts on the economic growth. And that is different from the disruption that we see when extreme weather events destroy something. In rich countries, this destruction is then being repaired and is generally or very often a positive signal in the GDP. As perverted as this might be, this is the way we measure economic activity. But what we found in the past 40 years to be true is that there has been an impact from weather on economic growth. And this is important because it is transported, transported from one year to the other, and any damage that you cause there is increasing over time exponentially. So we find that in the next 25 years, we'll have a decrease of economic growth by 20% compared to a world without climate change due to the climate change that we have already caused. This is about 6 times larger than the current estimates of the mitigation costs that we have in the next 20 years, which makes the Paris Climate Agreement not only a politically sensible agreement, but also the economically sensible one, because reducing climate change is fundamental for the well-being of the world economy.
Well, thank you very much indeed for setting the stage here and for explaining this, the profound impact this trajectory we are on, that it has on our economy and for our businesses, apart from humanity as a whole. So thank you very much, Anders, for staying with us here and sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Now it's my pleasure to move into a panel and introduce the first speakers here that are in the studio with me. We're Habergosh, a think tank, Climate, Environment and Water. And also Julia Baruti, Director of Climate BSR. And with us on Zoom, we have Anna Hall. She's Head of Public Affairs, Energy Division, Alfa Laval. And also we have Claire Wigg with us, who is Head of Climate Exponential Roadmap Initiative. Wonderful to have the two of you joining us on Zoom too. So we just heard about how close we are to transgressing even more planetary boundaries. But we don't really want to imagine a world like Anders stated here, where we can't be able to stop this transgression. So let's now imagine a world where we have succeeded, where we have not transgressed any more planetary boundaries, which would be a net zero world, of course. So Claire, starting with you, from the Exponential Roadmap Initiative perspective, what does a net zero world look like for business?
Yeah, thank you. Very good to be here, and nice to see everybody. So we think that business will look very different, obviously, in 2050. We've all been told for some years now about the transformations that need to take place. So most existing large companies will need to transform their supply chains, they'll need to transform their processes, their business models, their energy, of course, if we're going to get to a net zero world at all. So what we've done at Exponential Roadmap in the last year, taking inspiration from the planetary boundaries, was that we set out to describe in terms that businesses could relate to what we would call the net zero operating space for business. So if you think about this, it's a space that is constrained. It is constrained. We have to realize that. It's constrained by the need to get as close as possible to zero greenhouse gas emissions and to restore nature. And it's also a space in which we need to meet the needs of all the people who live on this planet in 20, 30 years' time. So from reading UNFCCC reports and from work by others on human needs and the necessary technologies and transformations we all know about, we came up with four characteristics that we think need to apply to all businesses in this net zero operating space. And they're characteristics that all climate solutions have in common. So they are circular. So all business models need to be circular, all material use needs to be circular. And optimized, that's optimized in all possible ways, which means efficient use of all resources and assets. We can't have anything sitting still and not being used. Everything's got to be in use all the time. And renewable, obviously in terms of energy, but also in terms of materials, and then regenerative. We define regenerative as meaning that all the processes a company is engaged in give back more to the planet, to people, to nature than they take. So that's our proposal, is that net zero businesses will be circular, optimized, renewable, and regenerative. And we're talking with our companies, obviously, at Exponential Roadmap about how they move in that direction.
Well, thank you very much, Claire Wigg. Turning now to Arun Abargosh, from an emerging economy perspective, how does these principles ring to you? What can you say about them?
I think in principle there will be agreement. I mean, one of the things with emerging economies is you're already under constraint, not just a carbon constraint or a fiscal constraint, you're on a cost of finance constraint. So efficiency of resources has to be part of your business model if you want to survive in an emerging market, let alone break through into a developed country as an export market. But I think there are now conscious efforts happening towards circular economy. We take India's new critical minerals mission. It's as much about digging up new mines as it is about actually the circular economy of minerals and materials. If you look at the optimization of resources that Claire was talking about, again, the way we are modeling out the growth of our renewables power in the power sector, the optimized role of solar and wind in a combined way actually helps you to transition away from fossil fuels faster than if you went down individual solar or wind or battery pathways. Of course, for emerging economies, the renewable story is also a leapfrog opportunity. Nearly 90% of additional electricity demand in the world will come from emerging markets. So here's an opportunity where you can see that the costs for renewables plus storage, for instance, is cheaper than coal or gas. You automatically get into the renewables-based ecosystem. The regenerative part is interesting because I don't think we have, let alone emerging markets, I don't think we anywhere at scale we have cracked the business models which then become investable financial models for regenerative processes at scale. Yes, there's a lot of regenerative agriculture happening. India is the largest such program in the world. Indonesia is doing things, etc. But when we talk about regenerative from, bioplastics, we're talking about regenerative from the point of view of, valuing nature so that, the value of the tree is, and the value of the soil from which the tree is growing is greater than the value of the chopped wood. All that requires very different approaches towards the business and the financial models that help you scale up.
Thank you very much. So Giulia Baruti, from the BSR perspective, what could you say about the principles that Claire Wigg stated here for net zero world for business?
Thanks much for the question, and thanks for having us as well. It's a pleasure. And well, the first thing I'll say is that I could not agree more with what Claire put forward. We also work with businesses, and we've explored these topics in the past year and a half as well with them. And all of this comes from the recognition that some of the businesses that have targets, they are not on the track to reach them. And so they are looking for ways to actually stay within this net zero operating space. So some of the key elements that I want to share here are first on the principles themselves. From what we put forward in terms of ideas, I really agree with the circular, regenerative and renewable that Claire put together. One thing that we have started to explore is also the principle of sufficiency, which is really looking at what we need to stay within the planetary boundaries rather than thinking about what we want.
Sufficiency.
So that's one. And the other one is, to me, the just transition principle to us should stay really at the core. There are just transition implications of changing business models, for example. One very concrete example, in a couple of years ago, we did a study on the apparel supply chain and the implication of moving to circularity there in terms of social impacts. And there are plenty, of course, in terms of jobs losses and things like that. And so we need to embed the principle of the just transition into there. And for us, this is very important. The other two things I want to say is, one, of course, businesses need to shift and transform. They operate within an environment that needs to be enabling. So the importance of policy and how finance thinks about this topic and keeping us within planetary boundaries is fundamental, and we need to think about that. And the other idea that through the conversation we had with companies and the work that we published, we explore is also this idea, which of course is underlying, of the mindset shift. There is no question about that. We need to move from the incremental to the exponential or transformational change, and this is something which maybe sustainability teams within companies understand very well, but it's a very difficult conversation to have within a company with other departments, and so there's a lot to be done in that space as well to achieve that net zero operating space.
Thank you very much, Giulio. Turning now to Anna Hall from Alfa Laval. 2050 in a net zero world, I mean, it might sound like it's very far away time-wise, but it's not really. So what good examples can you give from a company perspective to plan ahead and to be able to make this transition?
I think planning is, A and O, so to say. I think to reach the net zero 2050 goals, we need to have swift short-term goals as well. So Alfa Laval is determined to be by 2030 already carbon neutral in scope 1 and 2, and have a 50% of carbon emission or emission reduction in scope 3. And then in 2050, net zero in all scopes. And for us, it's super important because then we can do hands-on targets that is actionable here and now. So we work hard with scope 1, of course, how we use our energy and our resources within our premises. Reusing the energy with heat pumps here in Lund in their headquarters, reusing energy from the production processes, and then enabling us to heat our headquarter office and the production facilities up to 90%. And also we work hard with, of course, electrification of transportation and of our own processes. And then in scope 2, we're already above 90% of renewables in the energy we use. And scope 3, we absolutely believe that we need to collaborate over the value chains. So helping our customers, of course, implementing energy efficiency in their processes. We know 40% of the Paris Agreement comes from energy efficiency. And in last year's COP, we agreed upon doubling energy efficiency implementation. And actually, the yearly capacity, I mean, over 100 or millions of heat exchangers that we both install and serve, we decrease the energy consumption by 100 gigawatts, and the carbon emission by 50 million tons, equals the whole emission of Sweden, if we just want to do a comparison. And so that is vital to us to walk the walk and to hold our customers in hand, and then also hold our suppliers in hand. So we work hard with activating the demand for innovative solutions. For example, circular models, reusing all the materials in our production, but also to look into, for example, fossil-free steel, low-emission steel. So now we just implement low-emission steel in one of our products, a whole new product line, and actually we can reduce the carbon footprint on this product with up to 40%, which I think is tremendous, through collaboration and partnership across the value chain.
That's quite impressive in this product. So Anna, in terms of reconciling profitability and sustainability, how are you finding this? Because many businesses do struggle with this perspective.
Yes, and I think it's a mind shift. For us, investing in sustainability is not a cost, it's an investment. That's super important for us. Maybe it's CapEx, OpEx constraint, but we always come back to that it's an investment. It's about how to be, of course, work with energy efficiency in our own processes, process optimization, and cost reduction, waste reduction, and so forth. That will bring revenues to us. But it's also about competitiveness, profitability, and growth, that we can develop new green solutions for the world that would really make a difference. And I think the only way to actually be a future-proof company, that is to work with the sustainability goals and the green transition and reduce carbon emission. And I also think that the new sustainability reporting, I know a lot of people struggling with it now in Europe, but I think it's very good because it gives us a new language, so we can have transparency and we can actually talk about measurements, and we can compare apples and apples and pears and pears. And I think that is going to be super fruitful for the future, when we actually know what we're talking about, hands-on and swift.
Thank you very much, Anna Hall. Erna Gosh, when it comes to transition plans in the business world, looking at the perspective we're sharing here, how relevant and what's happening in your country, India, when it comes to these transition plans?
I mean, we've been, of course, looking at it not just in India, but across the world. 2 years ago, I served on the Secretary General's high-level expert group on the net zero commitments of corporations. And the good news is that across the world, including in developing countries, over the last 2 years, of the 2,000 largest companies, there has been a 23% increase in the number of voluntary commitments towards net zero. Amongst states and regions, there's been a 28% increase. Among cities, there's an 8% increase. In my own country, my organization is working with 17 of India's 28 states.
17 out of the 28.
28 states to look at, different pathways, because, India is a country of countries, so they have heavily industrialized states and heavily agricultural states, and their pathways will differ. The bad news is that many of these plans, their targets or their voluntary commitments, but the plans require more granular analysis. From a company perspective, we see across the world that there's a very small fraction of companies that are doing what Anna was describing, right? Which is scope 1, 2, and 3, right? So it's not so much the procedural, but the substantive gaps that are there in the plans. The other challenge, when you look at companies operating in different geographies, is the longer tail of the supply chains, right? So you need the queen bee company to create the demand pull, but the supply chain entities often require access to working capital. They are worried about competitiveness within their clusters, etc. So that's again something that you need to focus on. And the third thing that needs to happen is really about establishing the near-term plan. So, 2050 net zero is one thing, but what do you achieve by 2025? What do you achieve by 2030? This gives, in the past, companies have asked for that from governments to give them clear lines of sight. Now I think governments need to ask that from companies. So what are you planning to get to by 2030? What are you planning to get to by 2035? So there is a complementarity. So suppose you were a company that decided to procure a lot of renewable energy, right, for your offtake. Then the government can also accordingly plan out the grid transmission infrastructure that will also sync up in line with that demand, right? So there has to be a two-step tango here, rather than just governments saying companies you do your thing and companies saying governments you do your thing.
Thank you for shedding light on this two-step tango. So a question that goes to Giulio and also to Claire here is about the transition plans connected to the business plans and related to the CSRD reporting that is now going on in Europe. So what can you say about this, the alignment here and how we can use the CS3D, or it's actually 3D, to CSRD and CS3D to really push for this alignment of the transition plans and the development of the business plans? Let's start with you, Giulio.
Yeah, happy to touch on that. Of course, there is a clear trend in terms of climate transition plan being pushed into regulations, and there are two types of regulations. You mentioned two types: the reporting and the due diligence ones. So CSRD is one of several reporting regulations that are pushing for climate transition plan disclosure. CSDDD is the only one, to my knowledge, that pushes for companies to adopt and put into practice a climate transition plan which is aligned with the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5. And that is a fundamental difference, because what's happening is that in many cases CSRD is helping, and the disclosure is helping companies in harmonizing the indicators that they look at in their climate transition plan. It helps with the harmonization of the different frameworks that exist on CTPs. But if CTPs keep on being a reporting vehicle, they are not going to be as transformational as we want them to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's where due diligence is good and different, in my opinion. The impact of CSDDD still has to be seen, because the directive was approved in 2024 and has to come into force. But I think it has a strong potential, because actually both CSRD and CSDDD talk about the business model transformation aspect of CTPs. And so if CSDDD is truly implemented in the way that it should, then we can really leverage that as a tool to achieve these net zero operating spaces we're talking about today.
Thank you. Let's hope for this indeed. Claire, Wigg, what is your take on this topic?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with what Julia's just said about CSRD, which Anna mentioned as the one that everyone's panicking about, as being a reporting tool. This just states the facts. It doesn't determine the ambition level, and that's where CSDDD comes in, I think, or could come in, as Julia says. We shall wait and see. I think it's interesting that I did hear from a company on the other side of the Atlantic saying that it was CSDDD they were afraid of, rather than in terms of making them transform. And they felt they had a good motivator to their internally to make a real transformation obvious in their climate transition plan, rather than just a tick box exercise. It was CSDDD that they were talking about. So I think that's very positive. Because what we've learned from companies is that when they work in detail, as a company like Alfa Laval has, on what their transformation could look like, and they work at a granular level, as Aranaba was saying, then transformation happens, or then invention happens. Necessity is the mother of invention. And when you get down to the level of costs and risks and things like that, which all of the business needs to understand, not just the sustainability professionals, then that's where the opportunity comes to actually plan out transformation.
Thank you very much, Claire. We've heard from many speakers here about the NDCs that countries ought to deliver next year, and that there also been some demand of companies being more in step with and pushing with the NDCs and going hand in hand. Of course, countries like Brazil and also the UK have announced that they have new target climates, and they've been announcing this already here at the COP. So Anna, What are your thoughts on how company transition planning and country transition planning can be interdependent?
I think, if we call for brave and bold NDCs, they should be actionable, localized, they should be measurable and financeable. And that's, of course, policy and legislations that has to come into place. But what we companies can contribute with is the solutions. The solutions already exist. So the governments and negotiators in COP now can be sure that we actually can implement those solutions at scale. And that's really when we need to go into the implementation phase. And I think then private sector, industries, financial bodies, insurance companies, we all need to find this financial model so we can unlock the implementation of the solutions. And I think the discussions that I've attended now here at COP this week has really been to that money exists. We need to just unlock it. And I think that is actually a very happy, fruitful discussion that we can really achieve our goals by collaboration. So I think industry, private sector has a very important role in messaging that it's achievable, and we prepare. We all have high ambitious scientific-based targets, and we're going to contribute.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm curious, Erna Bargosh, what are your thoughts on this, the interdependency between the NDCs and the businesses' transition plans?
I mean, they're certainly interdependent, but interdependent in different ways. One is technology. Actually, if you look at the history of multilateral environment agreements, in many cases, those that have been successful is because business or innovators had already got the solution. And then the treaty or the regime helped to create the market to deploy that solution at scale. The Montreal Protocol is one example of that. And we know that there is a lot of continuing innovation that's happening in the clean tech space that can be given a bigger push were there a multilateral deal that gets ratcheted up over time. But in addition to that, there's another interdependency, which is about trade and investment. And that is not discussed necessarily at a COP, but that is becoming very real. For emerging markets, for instance, there is now a triple whammy that they're dealing with. The first is that there's not a problem we've created, but yes, we acknowledge since Paris Agreement that we've got to be part of the solution. Right? But the double whammy was that we want to be part of the solution, but the investment is not flowing. There's only 15% of global clean tech investment that goes to emerging markets and developing economies, excluding China. So you can set out the policies, but the investment isn't coming. And the third, the triple whammy that's now coming is, even if we were to do the energy transition, where is the scope for the economic transformation? This is where, if large advanced economies start using protectionist policies and just try to hoard all the kind of investment and the capex within their territories, then you don't create globally interdependent, codependent, resilient and reliable supply chains. Imagine it in a different way, where you make a component and Julio makes a component, I make a component, we all need to trade each other to make the final product. Then not only are we transitioning away from a dirty to a cleaner energy system, we're all creating a stake in the clean industrial economy of the future. This will not come just from bottom-up business. It will require top-down coordination amongst countries. So I said this in front of the Secretary General yesterday, that global collective action requires global collective coordination. And that's why this interdependency needs to be unpacked between not just business and their national governments, but a level of cross-border trade and investment reimagined.
And we do see more protectionism on the rise.
That's the worry.
That is the worry. So Julia and also Claire, in terms of your members in your organizations, your respective organizations, what is your call to action when it comes to this topic of transition plans as a tool for transformation?
Yeah, I think my simply said, maybe not simply done, call to action is to acknowledge the climate transition plan as a strategy tool, to embrace that. And we all know that the transition is not easy, but it is necessary, and so that we should embrace it and collaborate to get to it. And then my second call to action is really, as I mentioned in the beginning of this one, is really to embrace the concept of the just transition and to make it central into how you deliver transition plans. There is a risk somehow in treating climate transition plans in just climate, whereas we need to acknowledge that there are dependencies with people and with nature impacts, and we need to at least uncover them. Climate transition plan are climate and business strategies, but we need to acknowledge the trade-offs and avoid the negative ones.
Thank you, Julia. Turning now to Claire. What is your call to action to the ERI members?
Yes, well, I would put to them Julio's calls to action as well, and then I'd add one that I briefly touched on before, which is that businesses should ask them the question: how can we meet our climate and nature biodiversity targets, as well as running a profitable business? Because they need to be discussing the details of the financing and finding opportunities. And the other one is related to the discussion of interlinkages with NDCs, and we would call, as I think the report that Aranaba was involved in called for, companies to declare their dependencies, especially on governments, but especially also on colleagues in their sector and supply chain, so that these are revealed. We need them up front so that everyone can see them, everyone can read them, and then people can collaborate to make these changes happen.
Thank you very much, Claire. So, Anna, from your perspective, you're already doing this. How do these call to actions ring to you?
I think it sounds good. I think we need to we need to really have the sense of urgency. It's 60 months left to 2030, and we need to halve carbon emissions. So, collaboration over the value chain is essential, and also, reveal the dependencies, and also realize the importance of policy and regulations, as well as incentives, but also implementation, action. That's what we call for.
Thank you very much, Anna. Aranaba Ghosh, you mentioned the meeting yesterday. I guess you were referring to the roundtable with you and Secretary General. Could you tell us a bit more about this and the call to action again from Brazil to bring more stronger NDCs and transition plans to Belém next year?
I think increasingly it's becoming evident that as we put forward the next round of NDCs, first the need to link it to climate and nature and biodiversity, because it can't be one or the other, which goes back to some of the original principles that Claire put out. It has to be regenerative, not just extractive. It has to be optimized, not just repetitive. So that's going to be important. But I think the issue of supply chains, industrial policy, energy security, these will inform the confidence with which governments can come forward with raised ambitions. Because we are no longer, and in the COP process itself, it's no longer really about setting ambition alone. It is about converting the ambition into action, but more importantly, in the context of this conversation, converting the action into accelerated action, exponential action. That's not going to happen by raising ambition alone. It's only going to, that inflection point, that S-curve, is not based on more rhetoric. It's based on getting the nuts and bolts of what is the bottleneck that I need to remove in my supply chain. What is the bottleneck that I need to remove in my investment plans? What's the bottleneck I need to remove in interconnections across borders? That kind of sort of coordinated capitalism is needed for us to move into sort of the next stage, the next level. It's kind of like those video games, right? There's no point in a 100-level video game if I'm acing level 10, compared to everybody else. That's no good. I have to figure out how to break through to level 11 or level 20, etc. And I think that's how we have to start thinking. And the pandemic is an interesting example. You would normally take 3 years to get a vaccine, right, with the clinical trials. Got a vaccine in 12 to 15 months. Of course, there was a lot of vaccine inequity, but the point is technologically you could get there because we recognized the asteroid that had already hit the planet. Now there's a different asteroid coming and hitting the planet. And could we do this just on our own? No. A lab in Oxford has to work with a plant in India to scale up, exponentially deliver the solution. That's what we need to do with decarbonization. along with development.
Thank you very much, Aruna Bargosh. And Julio, in terms of really leveling up, we're speaking of the gamification terms here, using them, what do you see if you look into the Berlin meeting next year, a year from now? What kind of leveling up are you hoping for in the business community?
I think, if I may cite two, I hope that's allowed.
It's
but one is around the accelerated transformation. So it's a time for implementation. I think I would echo what you said. We don't need to raise the ambition only. We really need to double down on the implementation. And so I would hope that by Belém there is progress that we can show, and that we got there. And the other one is getting back to the point I made earlier about the interconnectedness of the issue. I would think that increased recognition by Belém about that interconnection is what I'm hoping for.
Thank you, Julia. And Claire, what levels have we broken through in Belém next year?
Well, I'm hoping that all the companies that don't have them will have climate transition plans by then, and that they will be sufficiently granular. And I'm also hoping that more companies will be on track. Julia mentioned earlier that a lot of companies are unfortunately not on track towards those nice ambitions that they have. So I'm hoping that we will have found some more collaborative breakthroughs, I think, so that, as Anna said, companies get their Scope 3 emissions under control.
And Anna?
Yes, we just do what we can. We are accelerating. We have a press release next week. I can't reveal the content, but stay tuned. And I think, I can only echo what has been said here, that it's about collaboration, it's about action, and it's about realizing the sense of urgency. 60 months left to 2030. We have a lot of things to do together, and let's start level up together.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. We have a few minutes to go before this session ends. Is there anything that we have forgotten to discuss that you would like to bring to the table? Let's start with you, Arnarba.
I think what we've not talked about explicitly, it's been implicit in our conversation, especially Julia's brought up just transition, is people. You know, this will not work if people don't believe that they are the agents of change rather than they are just the recipients of something far removed that is being done to govern their destinies. I say this particularly because this has been the most democratic year in human history, the number of elections that have happened.
It's true that.
And some have gone some ways and some have gone other ways. And that's not the point. The point is, until we give away our destinies to AI, we are in charge of our destinies. And we've got to understand that the economic agent by day is a citizen by night. And we've got to bring people more explicitly into that conversation about transitions, about leveling up, about a different way of radical collaboration.
Thank you. Beautifully put. And I'm not sure that I completely like this phrase, when we hand over to the AI, but well, we'll leave it at that. Would you like to add anything, Julia?
I think we touched on a lot of topics. I will just underscore, when we talked about the CSDDD component, I think that provides a very good opportunity to de-silo some of the work that's been going on in sustainability with the human rights field, with us climate and nature professionals. And I think we should jump on that wagon and embrace it as companies.
Thank you. It's all interconnected, huh? Yeah. So, Claire and Anna, one last round.
Yes,
anything you'd like to add? Yeah.
Following on from Julio there, yes, I've been hearing people talk recently about the way that you can actually find synergies in your actions and strategy, which will deal with different aspects of the sustainable development goals, and therefore come away from this idea that there are trade-offs. And I think we need to move towards a language of there being synergies rather than trade-offs within company action and country action. So that would be nice to see.
Thank you. And Anna, you get the last word here.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's about people. I think also we jointly have to bring the good examples so we actually succeed. I'm a mother of 4, and I keep telling my kids all the good examples I find every day to see that actually we're taking one step at a time. because it's so easy to see the big picture and get a little bit depressed. But we have a responsibility to next generation and to our own generation, to the people we live with on this planet, to bring up the good examples and, I mean, really point out how we can level up together.
Excellent. Well, let's finish this by the word saying level up. I mean, that's excellent. It's gamification, and maybe that's a good way of looking at it, even if it's much more than a game. So thank you very much for joining us here, Aruna Bargosh, and also Julio, of course, and Anna and Claire. It's been wonderful to have this conversation with you, and this has been brought to you by Exponential Roadmap Initiative that really works very focused on this topic. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.